Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's webcast, The DevOps Security Journey. I'm Chris Riata, staff writer here at FCW. I'll be your moderator for the discussion today. You know, the focus of DevOps has evolved greatly in the past couple of years. Security is more important than ever before with an increased prevalence of hybrid and remote work. And zero trust architectures are a crucially misunderstood piece of the puzzle, as many agencies have not yet placed the same value on security as usability. And then there's this question of whether oversight mechanisms for rating security are currently out of step with how work is being done. So joining me to discuss all of these important issues is Department of Education CISO Stephen Hernandez. Stephen, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us.
Thank you for having me today.
Absolutely. I guess, you know, to sort of begin, can you just talk a little bit about how the Education Department is really incorporating security into its DevSecOps playbook?
Yeah, what a great question. And I always like to preface this by saying, you know, it wasn't that long ago when online there was this meme of a unicorn, and out of the posterior of the unicorn was a rainbow landing in a pile of unicorn, and then the security team was there with a shovel, right? And I think that that's how a lot of people felt about DevSecOps and security, not even a few years ago, but I think what's been incredible is how that relationship has continued to evolve and get to where it is today. I think that when we look at some of the most advanced and mature examples of DevSecOps in my own department, we see examples of where security is at the development table. It's in the development team. It's actually establishing and living the mantra of build security in versus bolted on at the end. And when security, including things like security audit and assessment, are part of that integrated team, we see things move incredibly fast, and we see security actually at the forefront of the discussion, and we see it proactively being built in. And so there's a lot of different ways this comes together, the human element, making sure we got the right people, but there's a lot of tools and capabilities also that we're bringing to the table to make sure as we bring in source code that's secure, there's licensing considerations, we're taking care of that, and also ongoing scanning and monitoring of that repository. Just because a library was safe today or some code that we adopted was secure today doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be secure tomorrow. And we have to establish those processes to continuously monitor the CI pipeline so that as we continue to integrate and develop, we're also able to monitor the holistic sense of the code base that we're watching over.
That makes sense. That makes sense. And I remember the meme vividly. And, you know, going off of that, I mean, we want the unicorn to have full security, right? And obviously a DevSecOps framework, which employs DevSecOps tools, ensures that security is kind of built into applications, like you said, rather than just getting like glued on at the last minute. But how do you really avoid having, you know, security audits kind of serve as a bottleneck in this process rather than kind of an effective stopgap to potential vulnerabilities finding their way into your systems?
It's actually a great philosophical discussion, and in some ways paradoxical to think about, because on one side of the coin, we have some security practitioners that say, I must be absolutely independent from the process. I must, you know, the developers are responsible for security, and at a certain point, I will come in and challenge their security and see what happens. The challenge is, if you logically step through this process to its end, the conclusion is, I'm going to look at what you're doing, and then I'm going to give you recommendations on how to fix what I find. Well, why can't we have that happen sooner? And when we start thinking about it that way, we're getting to the same outcome, but we're breaking down these barriers of supposed independence and saying, actually, no, I'm going to actually forward deploy one of my assessors into the development team. And as they're developing, hey, I want to pull in libraries X, Y, and Z. I want to start, you know, using these APIs. That security assessor is looking at that in near real time and saying, hey, you go that route, you're going to violate the living heck out of compliance X, Y, Z. Maybe we should try something else. The amount of time that saves us, astronomical, just from a compliance perspective. And then, oh, hey, this library happens to have a GRU inject in it. Let's definitely not use that. Well, they caught it right in the beginning because they saw everything versus testing a black box at the end where maybe you find it, maybe you don't. And so when we shift the philosophy and we focus on the outcome, which is exceptionally strong code, and speed to delivery, whether we're doing a Scrum or a Kanban or whatever, we find that integrating earlier into the process with the assessor delivers those outputs.
That's interesting. Are those some or of the examples that you've seen in real life scenarios at the education department? And what are some other best practices that you guys have been employing to, to really ensure the effectiveness of these security measures and them being built in throughout the entire process?
Yeah, it really is. And another important part of it is, security has to be part of the story in the outset. We can't just talk about we want feature X. If feature X is going to implicate some privacy information, or it's going to implicate potentially a need for encryption or whatnot, these are things that we got to make sure we get right as kind of the MVP level, the minimum viable product. And that's where having now a new set of skills, security engineering and architecture, integrated in with the team is going to help, because they're going to say, whoa, hang on a second, that might look like health information. We can't do an MVP unless we have a certain level of vetted encryption as part of that solution. The other piece I would say is the use of tooling is vitally important, and making sure that we have a known trusted code repository. That code repository is scanned by a capability that is constantly looking for new vulnerabilities tied back to the MITRE Common Vulnerability Enumeration Database. And that also we're looking for things like, one of my favorites in government is the beerware clause. And this is a clause in some open source software where if you use the code and you happen to meet the developer, like at a bar or a restaurant, you have to buy them a beer. Well, the problem with that is when government lawyers look at it and they governmentize it, it becomes an indemnity issue, because, well, how would we ever know if we meet them? Where do we reserve the money to pay them and buy them this beer? Should the government be buying them beer? And so having a tool that can go through and automate and sort all that out and be able to flag those pieces of code is going to pay dividends in the long run as well.
Right. Now, I imagine with the wave of guidance around all of this in recent years, and the cybersecurity executive order, and we have constant guidance being released from, everyone from CISA to NIST. Can you sort of talk a little bit about, which guidance has really been effective in terms of serving kind of your teams and in implementing security throughout these processes?
Yeah, so executive order, just a monolith of incredible cybersecurity vision that we're all working and executing now. And when we look at it, there's really three big memorandums that are driving departments and agencies towards their execution of the cybersecurity executive order. That first one is OMB 2130, and this is around software. And whether it was some of the incidents in the past with commercial off-the-shelf software or government compromises, we are well aware that we have got to shore up our software supply chain, whether we're developing it or we're relying on the industry to provide it. And so what the first memo did is it said, okay, we need to develop and understand what the government considers a secure software development framework, an SSDF. And this has gone out and done it. And it said, in software development, you have these type of capabilities. They map back, you are operating in a secure software development framework. And right now, what's most likely down the road is a certain level of self-attestation from vendors, especially those providing critical software, that yes, what I'm doing maps back to the secure software development framework. And the good news is a lot of folks out there already have the big blocks in place. They already have the foundations needed to show that they're doing it. Folks using Intodo and Salsa and whatnot, they're going to be way ahead of the curve on this and being able to show, yeah, we're doing this. The other part of the software piece is really around this idea of the software bill of materials and how do we work with that. And I think we'll see more conversation about that as we go forward. The second memo is 2131, really around logging and making sure that we can understand what's happening in our systems. We have a record of what's happening so that in the unfortunate event we have an incident, we can quickly put the pieces together, figure out where the weakness is, and be able to execute. And this is vitally important as we start thinking about things like DevSecOps, because every change I might potentially make, every new commit I'm making to the code base, there should be a question, a standing question with that particular piece. Does this implicate additional logging? Am I bringing in new transactions? Am I bringing in new data? Am I changing something with the interface that might necessitate more logging? And this has to be one of those standing items that a dev team looks at and says, at the application layer, what am I generating in terms of logging, and that can I meet those requirements of 2131? Moving into 22, we have Omb Memorandum 2209. This is the Zero Trust Memorandum. And what's fascinating about Zero Trust is one of the core tenets is we don't trust the network. And what's fascinating is as we build that up, what it says is I don't trust layer 3. Well, I probably shouldn't trust layer 4, layer 5, layer 6, all the way up to layer 7. And that's where we start talking about in like the perfect, wonderful bliss, highest levels of maturity for Zero Trust. The application is managing the trust between the user or the bot, whatever is interfacing, and the objects, the data, the information behind the scenes. And this is a big area that over the next 5 to 10 years, the DevSecOps teams need to be aware of, because we will be shifting trust from that layer 3, and we will continue to push the nexus of trust up to the application. And things like software as a service and cloud environments are basically leading the charge there, because that's where we're interfacing, that's where we're interacting. And dev teams are going to have that responsibility to make sure that from a Zero Trust perspective, their application can fit within the architecture.
Right. You know, I mean, when it comes to the federal policy of all of this, it does seem like there is this, I guess, with this increased focus on cybersecurity, there is this real kind of, you know, shift in federal policy where it seems like they're at least on the right track. But I'm wondering, you know, you've served throughout federal government. I'm curious about your thoughts on whether there are we missing any sort of proper oversight mechanisms to really ensure that, you know, the current software that we're implementing and embedding and security practices, these are really up to par? Or do you feel that currently federal oversight is somewhat outdated, or it needs to be maybe reformed perhaps?
Yeah, I think that when we look at especially the Omb Memorandum 2130, we see a call to action there, and we see a call across departments and agencies to shore up what they're doing in terms of software adoption and development. And I don't think we're done. I don't think 2130 is going to be the last we hear about this. I think that there's an appetite from the CISO community out there to say, let's continue to drive forward on this. And I think that it's kind of like two sides of the same coin. We have the left of boom conversation, you know, before something bad happens, which is the secure software development discussion about let's make sure that as software is being developed, we're implementing steps that make it much harder for an adversary to tamper with code or inject things we may not be aware of. But then to the right of boom conversation, if we do have another log4j situation or whatnot, how quickly can I go through and identify where I may have a particular piece of code, a particular module, a particular library in my environment? And I think that was one of the big calls that we had during log4j was it took a lot of manual process by architects, by engineers, by folks who may not normally be in the incident response process, our software developers, to go and actually deconstruct systems and understand, do I have this code nestled somewhere in this application? And in some cases, our commercial counterparts, they were going through the same thing. To work in that space, I think what we're going to see is this renewed push on things like software bill of materials. Because if you're providing us with software, give us the ingredients list, right? Just like I look at the ketchup in my fridge, all right, tomatoes, some sugar, vinegar, etc. I know what's in there. We need to have the same type of visibility into the software, especially software we're consuming. And I think that the magic in all of that is making sure that we're leveraging extensible languages to make it machine readable. So, you know, SPDX is a very common way to do SBOM. There's others out there, but basically making it so when I get software, I automatically have an SBOM I can point my tools to, and then, you know, heaven forbid we have another log4j situation or equivalent. First thing I do, I go hit the S-bombs and I figure out where might I be affected, and then I can prioritize my triage. So I think as we go forward, we're going to see those actions. In terms of oversight, I think we're going to see a continued interest by both the National Security Council, in terms of Chris Inglis, the National Cyber Director, and also the Federal CISO Council, in driving that point home and saying, in the government, we are moving the bar up a little bit, and we want industry to partner with us, and frankly, make the entire industry just a little bit better in how we do software.
Right. You mentioned Log4j, and obviously there have been some recent memos coming from the FBI and other agencies warning of this sort of increased potential for cyber attacks impacting, agencies that, as well as the private sector. Do you feel in the CISO community, does the CISO community feel that they have the funding and the resources necessary to kind of follow these guidances and really implement security effectively, in the speed and sort of way that it needs to be done kind of very quickly in order to kind of counter any sort of potential attacks that we may see in the coming months?
Well, I'll say this: if you ask any CISO if he needs more money or resources, she'll always say yes. There's always risk we can buy down. Having said that, it is a challenge. Oftentimes, these actions are coming to us as unfunded mandates. Oftentimes, we have intersecting events. For example, when we have a continuing resolution, many times we are unable to do anything beyond what we did last year. And that means very little development, modernization, or enhancement, DME as we call it. We can't do that under certain conditions like a continuing resolution. These things greatly restrict our ability to be able to move ahead, because if I'm under a continuing resolution for 6 to 9 months, well, I'm not going to be doing a lot of the security modernization and activity I need to do. And then towards the end of the year, it's rush and crush, right? It's like you're going to have to figure that out. The great news is we've also got some new tools at our disposal that haven't been there before. So, for example, one of the things we're using at the department to help address this situation is the Technology Modernization Fund. We went out and put a proposal out there for zero trust technologies, and particularly around secure access service edge, or SASE, and security orchestration, automation, and response. And we were able to get funding through that. And that funding doesn't necessarily have the same restrictions and the same challenges that, for example, continuing resolution might add. So there are some new creative ways we can approach it. And the kind of the overarching piece of that is the Office of Management and Budget right now. Chris DeRusha, our federal CISO, and our desk officers, everybody at OMB has been exceptionally receptive about saying, what is the actual cost to implement the cyber order? And get the numbers in front of us. And you look at some of these, like the logging memo, some of those price tags are eye-watering. When you get to the highest level of maturity, it's like, wow, that's some real cheddar on the board, right? But they're not flinching. They're saying, no, let's see what it really takes to get to where we need to be in security, and let's start planning it out. And that's been exceptionally refreshing to hear, is that folks aren't shying away from the big numbers, and they're saying, okay, let's recognize those big numbers and get a path forward with those big numbers.
Right, exactly. And I'm pretty sure they even requested an additional 300 million in the 2023 request for TMF. And congratulations, by the way, on the TMF award. Actually, I'm interested. Can you suggest that there's a little bit of more flexibility, I'd imagine. So with that funding, can you talk a little bit about how that process has been working with, the TMF board, receiving the award, and now beginning in this next phase?
Yeah, so first and foremost, hats off and kudos to the TMF board and the support PMO at GSA. Just a phenomenal, I dare say, world-class team out there. And the process, it was challenging, but in some cases also a lot of fun, because One, you are really challenged with putting together big transformative actions that can have an impact with the public. And my department, we hold about a third of the nation's PII. We've got a $1.5 trillion accounts receivable. We have a substantial impact with the public. And frankly, anything we do in security is going to strengthen that relationship, build more trust and confidence, and hopefully even get more folks using what we have available to service them. Being able to connect those dots, tell the citizen story, tell the user experience, and how security is going to advance it, that's a critical part of making it through and getting acceptance. And towards the latter part of the process, when you're getting up there, because the PMO is helping you put it together, making sure everything is all buttoned up nice, you get in front of the TMF board, it's like a Shark Tank. It's like you get 10 minutes to get out there, pitch the big idea, and sell it. And then they've got about 10, 15 minutes for Q&A, and then you cross your fingers and you find out in a little bit if you made it through. And so the good news is it's just such a popular program. I mean, we had about $1 billion in the initial pot. I think we had close to almost $2 billion worth of requests. So folks are hearing the message, and folks are getting out there and getting those requests in. The real challenge I think the TMF has right now is just making sure that they can sort through all those applications and pick those great winners. But I would say if you've got the right idea, you're able to connect to citizen impact and modernization with cybersecurity, get that application in, because that is definitely a sweet spot right now.
I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall in that process. And I would say that would absolutely make for great television. I could imagine Claire Martirana and making the decisions after an love that. You know, it has me thinking though, with the sort of amazing opportunity to use something like that, to use a fund like that to really advance your sort of security efforts and your cyber posture. Do you feel that there are any sort of policies that are kind of roadblocking agencies that perhaps don't have those opportunities yet, maybe haven't received an award? Are there any sort of federal policies or things that are kind of just preventing agencies from really, being able to be successful in their, security journeys?
Yeah, not so much policies as I would say as more along lines of opportunities to see if we can mature and advance an area up towards closer to what industry is offering. And one space in particular, I think about almost daily is workforce. And it used to be in the federal space, we could say that, federal government, we just have this unparalleled mission. We don't necessarily pay as well as private sector, but there's so much other things we can offer: work-life harmony, great career path, et cetera. The challenge with COVID and the pandemic is industry is caught up and in many ways surpassed this now in a lot of these dimensions. They can offer the work-life harmony with remote work, telework at the same, if not more than the government can. In some cases, they offer better development opportunities. In some cases, they offer better upward mobility. And so, when we think about the policies and what's in play here, we're still largely held to the same GS scale, the pay bands, et cetera, that we've had for frankly decades. And the question is this structure still the right structure to attract, retain, and grow the talent that we're going to need in the federal government? And we've seen some early attempts at kind of reshaping that and how it could look in the future. We've seen the cyber talent management system out of CISA that's getting launched and gaining speed now. We've seen efforts at, say, Department of State with their credential pay program to hopefully attract, develop, retain folks with cyber credentials. And looking at these programs, I think there's an opportunity to continue to explore this with the Office of Personnel Management, with OMB, and say, our cyber positions and frankly IT positions, are they structured correctly? Because we have to make sure our IT brethren and sisters are at the table with us, because they're half of the security coin. The developers, the network administrators, the database folks, they're all part of the security equation, and we got to be able to attract that right talent and keep them across the board. So that's one area that I think is ripe for continued growth and exploration. And so far, there's some good indicators that we're going to do just that.
Yeah, and going off of that, obviously the pandemic had a huge impact on remote work, and then for the Department of Education as well. Can you talk a little bit about how security has played a role in that, and what sort of challenges your teams have experienced throughout the process, and now that we're looking towards the future, if remote work is going to remain kind of a component at the Department of Education, what sort of steps are being taken or considered around security?
Yeah, so one of the most terrifying moments when we started into the pandemic was when our PIV offices, our badging offices, we had to close them simply because they weren't configured and equipped at the time for in-person interactions. And the first thing that went through my head is, I can't have my workforce using username and password to authenticate into my environment. That is wholly unacceptable in this day and age. We've got to figure something else out. And in true agile fashion, we pulled together a fast team, a tiger team of all the right folks. And over the course of 5 days, we re-architected our authentication system to support an additional multi-factor solution using a mobile app, an SMS, and some other tokens that we were able to then deploy. And so that did a couple things. One, it taught us that we can move rapidly and with excellence when we have the right steps, and when we kind of Kanban things and say minimize work in process, except just these things that are vital to get done, we can move exceptionally fast on some things. And then shortly after doing that, we had one of the largest onboardings we'd ever had at the department, and we didn't miss a beat. So things worked out well there. And as we worked through, now we're encountering some new interesting challenges, and that, for example, our executive order talks about the need for phishing resistant authenticators. And what that means is that it typically means a physical token of some kind, or in some case, a software certificate that's at play on your workstation. And for us, the PIV already meets the requirement, which is great. The other, like MFA solution we put in, not quite there. A few of the options we have do meet the requirement, but not all the options. So now we're optimizing again. We're looking at the environment and figuring out, how do we take the folks who need to get to that next level of authentication and get them taken care of. And it's really brought to light this idea of servicing. How do we service a cross-nation workforce? And this is where leaning into shared services like US Access have been an absolute godsend. Because before US Access, like many departments and agencies, we were issuing out our own PIVs from our own department solution. And that was fine if you happened to be in DC, Dallas, or a few other locations we were at. But if you were down out in a small city in Louisiana, that could be a 6 to 8 hour drive. And so going to US Access and leveraging the capabilities of the shared services there really enabled us to take advantage of the 200 plus locations they have across the nation, and frankly, build relationships with other departments and agencies so that they could use our facilities, we could use theirs, and it really became a cross-government partnership. I think that is probably the largest takeaway we've seen here, is the power of forming those connections and the power of leveraging shared services across multiple agencies to move our agenda forward.
Yeah, it's just incredible to think about the speed at which your agency and so many other agencies were forced to kind of just re-architect their entire systems and processes there. Now, I imagine being able to sort of take a breath, at least for a few minutes, and kind of think about and envision how to advance it and keep it moving forward. You're given a little bit more time, so maybe it's hopefully not as stressful of a situation for you. Thinking about all of this, I guess just as sort of a final question, have you found in your experience, and now I guess after the pandemic, that the federal government and agencies and organizations with frameworks around DevOps are kind of increasingly shifting towards DevSecOps mindsets, or what else do you think really needs to be done to help agencies take that next step and into really building security into their DevOps flows?
Yeah, it's great, and I love the mention of DevSecOps, right? If I had my branch chief over security engineering and architecture here, and I asked him, so tell me about what you're doing in development, he would tell you about his Sec DevOps team, right? And so it's really about how we're prioritizing that security piece. And I think the biggest takeaway is start having the conversation about the outcomes. What is the outcome we want to see as part of these transactions? And understanding that in many cases, being able to take processes we already have within cybersecurity, be it continuous monitoring, be it vulnerability scanning, pen testing, whatever the case may be, and saying, can we actually turn those into microservices that can then be consumed by those DevSecOps teams? That's where you really just start to get like warm butter all over everything. And it's just everything becomes better because consumable services that a DevSecOps team can pull in and integrate and leverage in near real time, that becomes magic for maintaining continuity and cadence in the pipeline. And so if you're a CISO or a security person out there, think about how we're delivering services and think about how can we turn them into either full-blown service offerings that are consumable, microservices that can be automated and plugged in to development pipelines, and then how do we start having those conversations with our dev teams? I think the most important conversation to have is letting them know that yes, I'm a CISO, and yes, I'm actually here to help. And there may be some raised eyebrows and skepticism, but when we start having the conversations about the speed at which consumption of services and getting folks early in the process will deliver, typically the speed alone is enough for most DevOps teams to say, I'm willing to be a DevSecOps pilot and start there.
CISOs come in peace. That's the main takeaway. Well, unfortunately, we've got to leave it there. We've reached our time, but thank you so much, Stephen, for such an insightful and engaging conversation and for sharing your insights with us on these crucial topics. I'm going to pass it now to my colleague, Amir, to continue the conversation with our event underwriter. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Chris. It's been great.
Thanks for that great conversation, Chris and Stephen. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Amir Mitchell with GovExec. To keep the discussion around DevSecOps going today, I have Mark Herder, a DevSecOps specialist from CyberArk. Thanks for joining me today, Mark.
Thanks for having us here, Amir. Happy to talk with you today.
Mark, let's start by giving our audience a bit of your background. What do you do over at CyberArk?
Yeah, so I'm a DevSecOps sales overlay at CyberArk. I cover all of our products that cover non-human entities. So anything that doesn't eat, breathe, or sleep, but still needs to get a secret, those are the products that I specialize in.
Excellent. Now, let's get into the meat of the conversation. We should start with the basics. How would you at CyberArk define DevOps?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, I think there's so many different definitions of what DevOps is, or people have a different idea, but in all reality, it's just a mind shift. And it's also a shift in the way that businesses conduct their software development as well as their software release cycle. So moving away from this old waterfall development methodology where you code something, security checks it, it goes through all these checks, and then it finally releases months and months on down the road. DevOps is it's a new methodology that really gives companies the ability to make small incremental changes and release those features out to their customers in a very fast and efficient manner. Some of the best companies in the world are releasing up to 20 times a day.
I see. Mark, over the course of the last decade, we've seen a shift in thinking around security. It's seen as less of a roadblock and more of an enabler. Which do you think came first, DevSecOps or that change of mindset?
I think the change in mindset definitely came first. And you see that with a lot of the technical debt that you find at some of the organizations that were early adopters of DevOps and some that are even adopting it today, maybe without the input of the security folks. It was very commonplace for security to be an afterthought or for security to be something that was thought of second. But you're right in believing and really seeing that it's an enabler now. Because again, when we go back to the whole point of DevOps, it's to move fast. And when you have to slow down because you didn't address the security at the beginning, It means that you're not moving fast anymore. You're slowing down, you're doing rework so that you can meet whatever compliance regulations, whatever security regulations, or whatever security needs that your organization might have that you really could have addressed at the beginning had you had that sec in the DevSecOps program at your organization.
Thank you for that, Mark. Budgetary limitations are always a factor in federal implementation. How can a DevSecOps approach be implemented with those limitations? Is that an approach that could ultimately save agencies money?
Yeah, Amir, it absolutely is a way to save money. And it's one of those things where you have to make an investment and you have to really be aware of the amount of time that your organization spends doing that rework that we just talked about. So again, if you've got good practices in place, your developers are able to kind of code to the security standards that the organization has put forth. Again, those might be government regulations, but there might be some internal regulations that the organization puts on their developers as well. And if you can achieve that the first time that you code, you're actually going to save time and you're going to save money. You're going to have you're going to be able to release your products faster. You're going to have less delays. And again, it's all about saving the rework. There's also some phenomenal research that's out there where you can really look and see how much money is saved when you have automation in place for security tools in the event of a breach. You can look at how quick it is to recover from a breach or recover from a security incident when you have that automation in place. So having kind of the tenets of DevSecOps in place and having security involved early in the process is going to enable a company to move faster more securely, to reduce the number of audit findings. And when they do have those audit findings, they're going to have the tools in place to address them quicker and get back on track so that they can deliver value to their customers. Whether that customer is a commercial customer or whether it's a US citizen, it's all about delivering value quickly, efficiently, and securely. And that's what organizations are struggling with right now. And that's why there's a shift from DevOps to DevSecOps so that you can deliver those things quickly and securely.
I see. What are the best practices to protect secrets for Containerize, cloud native apps, and CI/CD pipeline?
You know, at CyberArk, we believe that centralization is where it all starts. You have to have one central way that you can control your secrets. This is so that security has all the audit information that they need. You can make sure that there's policies in place so that rotation happens at a regular time or at a pre-described time, and it happens as it's supposed to happen. Let's start that one over. You want to ask that question again?
Yep. What are the best practices to protect secrets for Containerize, cloud native apps, and CI/CD pipeline?
Yeah, at CyberArk, we believe that it starts with centralization. You've got to have that centralized control so that you have a means to rotate the credentials on the schedule that you define. You can even define these to happen in off-peak hours. You can set it up so that the rotation happens in kind of a blue-green approach where you're always going to have a valid credential for your pipeline, but you also have to involve your developers here. So developing kind of an identity governance solution or identity governance practice within the organization so that the developers can continue to move at the speed that they want to move at, but that again, that they can do so securely. So there's two parts to that. There's storing them, the centrals credentially, making sure that the management of the credentials meets the enterprise standards. These are things that are defined by NIST. These are things that are defined by organizations. But you also have to empower the developers to move quickly and efficiently. Now, when it comes to how you actually retrieve them, I think that role-based access is really the way to go with any type of application. When you look at a containerized service or you look at a microservice or anything else like that, it's short-lived. We don't know what it's going to look like the next time that it starts. There's changes that are happening all the time. So those cloud roles, those platform roles, or maybe the Kubernetes deployment, the Kubernetes service, something like that, should be how you can identify the workload. So you want to do this without a secret zero. We talked a lot about efficiency in our call today. And when you introduce a secret zero, and what I mean by that is a secret to get a secret. You could store an API token and say, okay, we'll use this to go get your secret, but you've just created more management. So again, I think it's integrating with the platforms, looking for vendors that have those integrations that are really tied in with the development tools that you're using, the platforms that you're using, as well as the cloud vendors. There's really lots of synergy that goes on in the application development space between the tool sets that are used to deploy these solutions, as well as the tool sets that can deliver security automation to the tool sets as well. So, again, I would go back to centralization, role-based access controls, but really providing a usable way for developers to use these secrets and be able to continue to code so that the organization can really get the benefits of a true DevSecOps program.
And Mark, what type of strategic advantage does this DevSecOps approach give an agency?
Yeah, there's really lots of advantages. I'm not going to say they're endless, but there's quite a few. We talked about the advantages of DevOps, those small and incremental releases, moving away from this idea where it takes 3 to 6 months or even longer, I've seen in government space, to get updates out to the field, to where you can deliver updates quickly and securely. But when you can automate your security, you can make that go even faster. And when you go fast, you have to move securely. And when you can automate the security portions of the DevOps pipeline, meaning that you've fully adopted that DevSecOps methodology, you're able to move your code from an idea to something that the public can consume much quicker. And when you've got the security involved there, you know that you're going to meet the audit requirements, you're going to meet the regulation requirements. And so again, it's all about speed, and adopting that is going to save organizations time. It's going to save them money. And when appropriately implemented, it's going to reduce the number of security incidents as well. When you reduce the security incidents and you reduce the audit findings, you return that time to the organization. You return the time to the business so that the people that were hired to code, the people that were hired to develop policy or whatever it is, they can do the things that they were hired to do rather than perform the rework that it takes to fix whatever audit finding happened as a result of not having DevSecOps implemented. The final thing I'll say is that if you just take off on the DevOps journey and leave security behind, you're creating years of technical debt. Eventually, it's going to catch up to you. There's going to be an incident. There's going to be a regulation. There's going to be something that comes, and it's going to require that rework. So adopting a DevSecOps program now is going to give government organizations a leg up. It's going to modernize their practices, and it's going to enable them to deliver applications. It's going to deliver or enable them to deliver services to the American public at large more securely for years to come.
Wow, that's great. Well, Mark, unfortunately, we have reached the end of our time today. Thank you again for sharing your thoughts with us. I know I learned a thing or two. I also want to thank CyberArk, our event underwriter, for their support of this event and bringing us together today. Lastly, thank you, our audience, for tuning into today's program. We'll be back with more next time. For GovExec, I'm Amir Mitchell.